Chapter 7. The Funeral. John felt as though his body was frozen stiff, yet his mind wandered free as the flurry of mourners congregated inside the old church. Images of Linda lying in a pool of her own blood. Theories as to who could have carried out such a crime. He couldn't shut it off. The thoughts plagued every waking minute of his existence. Despite the fact that he'd been on the door, thanking everyone for attending the funeral service, he could not recall a single person that had passed him. It was as if he was on autopilot, just drifting through the mundanity of his day-to-day life while using every waking fibre of his energy to piece things together. If John had truly been able to appreciate the funeral, he may have been touched by the sheer number of people that had turned up. Linda had always been a popular figure, both around the town and throughout her life in general. She was the person who would always stop and have a chat if she saw you. The person who would go out of her way to help, even if she only met you a couple of times. She was certainly not the person who deserved to die, especially not this way.
"I'm sorry for your loss,"
the latest lady in a long line soothed as she shook his hand.
"Linda often talked about you at work. How long is it that you two were together?"
John snapped back into the room. The vast majority of people had simply shaken his hand, made a remorseful remark and moved on. However, this latest mourner was showing no sign of going anywhere.
Thank you. 22 years,
John stammered, desperately trying to put a name to the face before him.
Cindy Cartwright,
the woman smiled, clearly picking up on his confusion.
I believe we met at a Christmas party a few years ago. Linda and I were so very close. I'm sure she spoke of me often."
John nodded. Of course, she loved everyone at the office. In truth, he had never heard the name Cindy Cartwright come out of his wife's mouth, but it was best to be polite.
"If you ever need someone to talk to, you can come seek me out, okay? Promise you will,"
Cindy urged, taking his hand in hers.
Yeah, of course. Very kind of you, thank you,"
John said, catching the eye of Stephen as an excuse to cut the conversation short. Stephen pulled John into a hug and offered a few words of comfort before taking his seat in the church. Once everyone was inside, John stumbled towards the front of the building and took his place on the first pew. He felt sick to his stomach, and his vision was blurred, as if he were about to pass out at any second. Over the next hour or so, various people took to the altar at the front of the church, said nice things about Linda, read poems and shared in song. It was all rather lovely, but once again, John would have been able to recall none of it. His mind was simply elsewhere. This service was for Linda's family and friends to bid farewell, but not for him. He had far more pressing matters to deal with. He would say his goodbyes once the killer was behind bars, and only then. As soon as the service was complete, the funeral party wandered out into the graveyard amidst the drizzling rain. The coffin bearers were already in place to lower Linda down into the ground after a few final words from the priest. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and all that. John walked up and threw one single red rose onto the lid of the coffin, while others sprinkled dirt as a final farewell. However, as his dead wife was lowered into her final resting place, John couldn't help but notice the gaze of a good-looking young man in the distance. He was dressed in full funeral attire and appeared to be concentrating on the proceedings at hand. It was stood far off, by the outskirts of the graveyard, as if he did not want to be noticed by the other funeral goers. As soon as the final part of the service was done, John ducked and weaved between well-wishers and headed over to the master man before he could slip back into the shadows. "John Lockdale," he said, extending his hand to shake.
"Tristan Jones,"
the man replied, accepting John's greeting.
"I apologize that I was unable to make it in time for the church service. I didn't want to intrude."
"Not at all," John replied with an appreciative smile. "How did you know Linda?" Oh, perhaps no isn't quite the right word, Tristan said. She was a client of mine at the salon in town. She was always so lovely to me, and I just wanted to pay my respects, you know. Well, we very much appreciate it, John nodded. Please feel free to follow the rest of us back to the house for the wake, if you have time. Tristan averted his gaze and shook his head, giving John a chance to snap a quick photo on his phone. I'm afraid I'm already late for work, but thank you so much, and you have my blessings. I know this must be an impossible time for you. Thank you. John couldn't help but remain suspicious, glad that he now had the photo to investigate further. Choice: do nothing or hire a private investigator to look into the guy. Do nothing, go to Chapter 8. Hire a private investigator, go to Chapter 9.